Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is 𝐏𝐀𝐑𝐓, and this is part 2 of our spoiler mega leak for Modern Horizons 3. An absolute metric ton of leaks, spoilers happened over the last few days, and we split it up into 2 videos. So if you haven't caught the first video yet, I'm going to make sure I link that in the description. Make sure to check that out because half of the cards that were leaked are in that video. But this is part 2, and there's a ton of crazy stuff here to go over. We're going to get right to it, but a couple things first really quick. First of all, there are just a couple spoilers that I left off of this for now, and that's because those cards are like half cards, things are cut off, and I'm gonna give it 24 hours, and hopefully we get better versions of those leaked cards available online so I can have more to work with. But if absolute necessary, I will make another spoiler video using those half cards, and we'll somehow soldier through it. It's also worth noting that it takes me an awful long time to put these videos together because I spend most of the day taking the images and manipulating them, doctoring them up, and trying to make them look as good, as clear, as presentable as possible for these videos, and sometimes it's really difficult. There's awkward angles, there's a lot of glare, there's blurry pictures. I do my best. So hopefully you guys enjoy, hopefully you guys appreciate that. I think I can go out on a limb and say that the versions that are in this video are probably the best quality that you can find anywhere on the internet. I don't think it's crazy to say that because I spend an awful lot of time making sure that's the case. So with that being said, please like the video if you could, because like I said, lots of work goes into these. It would help me immensely in getting the video out to that many more people, and I appreciate it so much. And if you're new, subscribe so you never miss an upload. Got tons of spoiler content on the way, tons of cool deck text from Thunder Junction on the way, lots of crazy stuff. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first card here. This is Thraben Charm. This is just a common, 1 white and 1 for an instant. You choose one. It deals damage equal to twice the number of creatures you control to target creature, or you destroy target enchantment, or exile any number of target player's graveyards. So a lot of versatility with this one. Should be pretty good in limited. Obviously it's going to be best in a go wide deck because it cares about how many creatures you have. But it's really cool that it's at instant speed. Don't overlook the fact that you can do this at instant speed, and that makes it a little bit better than it otherwise might be. Next up, we've got Deserted Temple. This taps for a colorless mana. It comes into play untapped. You can also pay 1 mana and tap it to untap target land. Now, this could be kind of crazy with things like 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 Academy, or Gaia's Cradle, or pretty much anything that does that sort of stuff. Nykthos, any of the crazy lands that tap for insane abilities. This is almost going to be like having a second one. Now you do need to sometimes come down on your land count on certain types of lands that matter in order to fit something like this in your deck. For example, like Cabal Coffers, you'll have 1 less swamp if you have one of these in play, so Cabal Coffers is going to make a lot less, but you know, you can get more. The ceiling is higher, so pretty cool land here. I kind of like it. Next up, we've got Glimpse the Impossible, 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. You exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. At the beginning of the next end step, if any of those cards remained exiled, you put them into your graveyard and then create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token for each card put into your graveyard this way. Those tokens can sacrifice to add a colorless Hedron mana. No, I will not call it just colorless. No, colorless is not generic. It is colorless. I don't care what everyone else calls it. I've had a couple people complain in my comments section lately that I don't refer to generic mana as generic. Look, I've been calling generic mana colorless since the 90s. I'm not going to change it because Wizards decided I need to call it something else, and that's just how I feel. If you feel differently, that's fine. We can all have different opinions. It's all good. This card's pretty good for a common. I like the fact that if you're playing some kind of a graveyard recursion deck, something where you want stuff in your graveyard, it's kind of all upside. You can get 3 dudes that ramp you while putting stuff in your graveyard that you want there to reanimate. So, seems kind of cool. Next up, we've got Disruptor Flute. This is 2 mana for an artifact with flash. As Disruptor Flute enters the battlefield, you choose a card name, and spells with the chosen name cost 3 more to cast. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So this is kind of crazy. It's almost like a super invasion of Gobakon in a way, or a card similar to that, where you're making something taxed more, but you're also able to tax the activation of abilities. Actually, more than tax. It's not taxing, you're just shutting them down, right? Unless they're mana abilities. So things like Wandering Emperor, this works really, really well with. You can actually flash this in response to a Wandering Emperor, name Wandering Emperor, and then they actually can't use the loyalty abilities at all. They just wasted their spell. They wasted their turn spending 4 mana for nothing. And that seems kind of cool. Just everything about this card seems kind of gnarly. It is worth noting that when it enters, you choose the card name. So you could theoretically flicker this to choose a different card name, and then keep taxing the thing that they're going to play next, which I think is kind of interesting. It makes me wonder just how abusable this could be. If there are any crazy ideas you have for using with this card, let me know in the comments for sure, because I feel like the ceiling on what you can do with these kind of shenanigans is pretty high. Next up, we have Dog Umbra, 1 white and 1 for an enchantment aura with flash. It enchants a creature. As long as another player controls enchanted creature, it can't attack or block. Otherwise, Dog Umbra has Umbra Armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So pretty interesting thing here. It can be an instant speed pacifism, or it can be an instant speed spell that protects your board state, protects your most important thing on the board, which is really, really interesting. Protection spell or pacifism in the same card. I think it's really good at common. I mean, I'm definitely going to be slamming it in limited, that's for sure. I don't know if it's quite good enough for constructed. I mean, the bar is pretty damn high for modern, for constructed, but it's definitely insane for common, for sure. Next up, we've got Spymaster's Vault. This is a land, it's a rare. When it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped unless you control a swamp. It can tap for a black mana. You can also pay 1 black and tap it. Target creature you control connives X, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn. What an interesting card. I don't even know exactly how I would want to use this. Obviously, it wants to go in a deck where you're sacrificing creatures, right? A lot of creatures. Maybe in some kind of a sack deck. But you're going to want to leave behind 1 creature that could get really, really big from conniving X. But sometimes you might not even care about making the creature big, right? You might just care about drawing and discarding a bunch of cards in your sack deck when you sacked all your stuff to trigger, you know, life loss or whatever sack outlets that you have, whatever payoffs you have in the deck. I don't know. It seems like there's a couple different ways you can use this card, and it's pretty versatile. So it's really interesting. On first inspection, I was tempted to think it's a little bit like a Raffine stapled to a land, but it's not quite Raffine, right? You want to keep your board state with Raffine. This wants you to lose your entire board state, so it'll be pretty interesting to see what kind of decks this actually wants to pop up in. But next up, we've got Thriving Skyclaw. This is 2 red and 2 for a 3/2 cat dragon with flying. Not bad for a common. When Thriving Skyclaw enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. And whenever Thriving Skyclaw attacks, you may pay 3 energy, and if you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So obviously this is going to be really good in the energy deck in limited specifically. You can use it to generate energy that you can stock up for a better energy payoff, and then just have a 3/2 flyer, which is nice. Or you can do the opposite. You know, you can bring it down on a board where you've already been stocking up a bunch of energy from other stuff, and then when you're swinging, you're allowed to make it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger every turn with all of the energy that you've built up. So kind of interesting. You can use it in a few different ways. You get a nice little evasive body. It'll be a pretty cool card in limited, I think. Next up, we've got Ocelot Pride. This is just 1 white mana for a 1/1 cat with first strike and lifelink. It also has Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, you create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then if you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, you create a token that's a copy of it. Man, gone are the days of Savannah Alliance, huh? That card used to be like the end-all be-all one-drop, and this card is just insane. There's just so much stacked on top of this one creature. It's worth noting that you get a copy of any token that entered that turn. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of these cat creature tokens if you have the City's Blessing. So you want to go super, super wide with this guy so you can turn on that City's Blessing as soon as possible, start getting even more value off of it. But you also want some really nasty, huge token creatures to capitalize on with that. And I think one of the better ways to use this would be something like Thousand Moon Smithy, where it comes onto the battlefield, it counts as a permanent and makes another permanent, so it helps you fill up your board with permanents so that you can get to the City's Blessing, and then also gives you this huge token that you can start making copies of every turn. And when it flips, you know, you can make a token every single turn with it after it flips into the land, so that you can then make a copy of that token every time it enters the battlefield that turn. So you can stack up some pretty interesting shenanigans with at least cards like that, if there are any other cards that are going to let you make huge tokens every turn to trigger this. It seems really, really good, but I mean, probably one of the best one-drops we've ever seen, possibly the best one-drop in white. Ragavans might edge this out for best one-drop ever, but definitely has the potential to be the best one-drop in white we've ever seen, I think. Next up, we've got Aether Spike. This is 1 blue and 1 for an instant. You choose target spell, you get 2 energy, and then you can pay any amount of energy, and your opponent has to pay 1 for each energy, or the spell is countered. So, on the floor here, this is just 2 mana, counter something unless they pay 2, right? But if they're all tapped out, you only have to spend 1 of that energy. Not only do you counter their spell, but you have an energy left over for other things, which seems really cool. And then, of course, if you're in a deck that's already going deep into energy anyways, you could have more energy left over and sort of play this almost like a syncopate. So, I like the fact that there's a lot of versatility to this. I like that it gives you energy and you don't have to necessarily use all of the energy it gives you. Just some really interesting options for ways to use this. I think it'll be fun to try to use this limited for sure. Next up, we've got Flare of Fortitude. This is 2 white and 2 for an instant. You may sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost, which is kinda nutty. But what does it do? Until end of turn, your life total can't change, and permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So this is basically Heroic Intervention on crack, except you can play it for free by sacking 1 creature. And here's the thing, because it's protecting your permanents, you're always going to be playing it in decks with a bunch of creatures anyway, right? So like, worst case scenario, they try to Wrath of God you, and you just sacrifice 1 of your creatures instead of losing your whole board, and you play this to protect the rest of your creatures. Not only that, if they had some plan to deal damage or swing in after sweeping or after using their removal or whatever, you're preventing damage for the rest of the turn, so like, they can't impact your life total at all. You're not technically preventing damage, right? Your life total can't be impacted. But basically the same thing. Effectively the same thing. But really, really interesting options here for this one. I think it's just kind of busted. Being able to protect your entire board for free in a deck where it's really, really easy to pay that alternate cost, right? And always have something you want to sack instead of losing, like, the better stuff that they're trying to kill. Just seems absolutely insane. I don't know. Am I out of my mind for thinking this is that good? Am I missing something? Let me know in the comments, but I think it's just kind of busted. Next up, we've got Frogmere Enforcer. This is kind of interesting. It's basically Frogmite and Mere Enforcer smashed into one. Maybe Wizards of the Coast is starting to run out of ideas, but it's a fun card. It's a 4/4 artifact creature Frogmere with affinity for artifacts, so it's going to cost 1 less for each artifact you control. It's for 7 mana, but like I said, affinity for artifacts means if you have 7 artifacts out, you just play this for free. You get a free 4/4. But if that wasn't good enough, maybe you don't have 7 artifacts out, you can prototype this. It comes in as a 2/2 instead of a 4/4, but you only have to pay 1 red and 3. And it will still have that affinity for artifacts, so that means this can come down a little bit earlier in the game. Maybe you're not so deep into artifacts, but you can still get value here off just basically paying 1 red mana for a 2/2 if you have 3 other artifacts in play. So I like the versatility that you can get a bigger thing if you have enough artifacts, but if not, it can still be useful as a 2/2 for 1. Just a lot this can a lot this can enable for you, right? It's a lot of ways it can be used. I think it'll be pretty cool and limited. Next up, we've got Guide of Souls. This is 1 white mana for a 1/2 human cleric. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and get 1 energy. So it's kind of like, it's like a Mother of Runes, except you get energy too. It only works on creatures that enter the battlefield under your control, so I don't... Did I say Mother of Runes? I didn't mean Mother of Runes. I meant Soul Warden. Why did I say Mother of Runes? It's like a Soul Warden, except it only works for you. But in exchange for it only working for you, you also get an energy in addition to a life. Really, really good. Whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy. When you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target attacking creature. It becomes an angel in addition to its other types. So basically, for every 3 creatures that enter the battlefield, you can turn one of your creatures into a flying angel and buff it up with an extra 2 +1/+1 counters. And that seems kinda crazy. It's also worth noting you don't have to attack with the Guide of Souls. You can attack with anything. And, you know, whatever attacking creature you want can turn into that angel immediately. Doesn't have to wait so that your opponent can't block it with ground guys. So, a lot of versatility here. You can build up energy and life for decks that care about energy and or life. And save that stuff for other payoffs. Or you can, like I said about all the other energy cards, you can stack up energy before you play this, and then really start to get value off of this guy every turn. So, seems pretty crazy. Man, this set's just looking so pushed to me. Just so pushed. I'm tired, guys. I apologize if I'm slurring my words at all or misspeaking. It's been a heck of a day trying to get this video ready, so we're gonna get through it though. This is Wheel of Potential. 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. You get 3 energy, then you may pay X energy. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards. If X is 7 or more, you may play cards you own exiled this way until the end of your turn. So it's kind of like a Wheel of Fortune with a limitation, right? You have to have a certain amount of energy in order to be able to draw that amount of cards. But the upside here is if you get to 7 energy or more, which if you're in an energy deck, you should be able to do that. You get to like play the stuff that you get rid of, whereas your opponent doesn't. So you get extra value. You know, you exile your hand, you draw a new hand, and then you play all the stuff that you exiled, and you still have a full grip of cards when you say go to your opponent. That seems like it could be really good. Granted, you're going to need a lot of energy, and you're going to need enough mana or cheap enough spells that you can really take advantage of playing those exiled cards. But either way, Wheel of Fortune with a potential upside seems kinda good to me. Next up, we've got Ajani Fells the Godsire. Now this is just an uncommon, but it's pretty cool. It's a saga. It's 2 white and 3. On chapter 1, you exile target creature an opponent controls with power 3 or greater. On chapter 2, you get to create a 2/1 white cat warrior creature token, and then put a vigilance counter on a creature you control. It's interesting that you don't have to give your 2/1 cat the vigilance, right? The vigilance can go anywhere. So you get this value on chapter 2 that you can split, and your opponent can't get rid of that value just by targeting one thing with removal, right? You can split that value up so that you have value left over after your opponent uses removal to get rid of one thing or the other, which is really interesting. And then on chapter 3, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn, which can be really good for alpha striking in. It's obviously the least effective mode on this whole thing, but just the fact that you get to exile something basically on ETB, not literally on ETB, but right when you play it, and then get subsequent value off this in later turns. I don't know, seems really good. It seems, I feel like if this was a standard legal card, you wouldn't be able to split up that vigilance counter and that 2/1. I think that would be the big difference. Seems really interesting. I like that there's removal, there's board presence that gets split among 2 different pieces, and then you have some extra filler tacked on chapter 3 as well. Should be pretty decent limited. Next up, we've got Primal Prayers. This card seems insane. This is basically a collected company on crack. It's an enchantment instead of just like a sorcery or instant or whatever. 2 green and 2. When it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You may cast creature spells with mana value 3 or less by paying 1 energy rather than paying their mana costs. If you cast a spell this way, you may cast it as though it had flash. So the downside here, in comparison to Collected Company, is you don't get to dig for the creatures, right? You have to actually have the creatures in hand. But if you're playing Modern or these other older formats, like, it's pretty easy to just have lots of stuff in your hand and not run out of value, right? There's plenty of ways to refill your hand aggressively. But the fact that you can just, immediately this hits the battlefield, you take 2 3-drops from your hand, get to play them for free by paying 1 energy each, that it gives you the 2 energy to do that. You effectively get the same board presence for the same amount of mana as playing a Collected Company, except then if you have other energy left over, you can continue to just put 3 drops out turn after turn for every energy you spend. So you can just cheat a bunch of 3-drops into play that way. So it's kind of like a Collected Company that lasts a long time, but doesn't dig you for the card advantage that you need, which, I don't know, it might be better to dig for the card advantage, but like I said, in these older formats, there's just so many ways to keep your hands full. I mean, Necropotence, anything else like that, so I don't know if that matters as much, you know? And if you have other energy built up, you can just put a ton of 3-drops onto the battlefield the very turn that you play this. You know, play a Mana Dork on 1, play this on turn 3 after a turn 2 Necropotence or something, and just like vomit out a hand of 3-drops. Seems kind of crazy. I like it. But moving on, we've got Kaalia of the Vast. This is a 2/2 legendary human cleric with flying for 4 mana in the colors of Mardu. Finally, Mardu gets some love. Whenever Kaalia of the Vast attacks an opponent, you may put an angel, demon, or dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that opponent. So what's cool about this is it doesn't penalize you for not using all 3 of the creature types, right? You could put this in a strictly angel deck and still get just as much value off of it as if you were playing all 3 tribes. Same thing with Demon Tribal, same thing with Dragon Tribal. This works really, really well in a deck that's going strictly into one of those, but it can also work really well in a deck that's got plenty of a combination of those 3 creature types, and I think that makes this card really, really interesting. It's also worth noting it's both a human and a cleric, which are relevant creature types, so it's possible that could play into it a bit and actually matter for this. But obviously, if you're using all 3 of those creature types, maybe you're using other versions of Kaalia as well, this could get really, really, really nutty. And it's fun to think that this might be cool as a commander too, because you'd be able to play all 3 colors in Mardu in your commander deck and have access to so much versatility as far as what direction you want to go with angels, demons, or dragons, or all 3. So seems pretty good. It stinks that it's kind of just a 2/2 for 4. It's very easy to kill, right? But there's so much upside that I think it might be worth it. Next up, we've got Sowing Mycospawn. This guy seems kind of wild. This is a 3/3 Eldrazi fungus with Devoid, so it's technically no colors, but it does cost 1 green and 3. It has kicker of 2 colorless mana, 1 being a colorless Hedron. And when you cast this spell, you search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So no matter what, you get the land. You don't have to kick it, right? You get a 3/3, search for a land, it comes onto the battlefield untapped, and it can be any land. It doesn't have to be a basic. So when you take all of that into account, that's pretty wild as is. But then you also have this extra ability to kick it for 2 mana, and when you cast the spell, if it was kicked, you also get to exile target land. And no, they don't replace it with something. They don't get to go search for a basic and get it back, right? You just exile target land, which seems kind of crazy. And it's also a cast trigger, just like other Eldrazi. It's not an enters the battlefield style trigger when you cast it, so they can't even counterspell your ability to exile their land. And let's be honest, in any kind of an Eldrazi deck, it's really, really easy to come up with 6 mana to actually cast this kicked. So This just does a lot. It ramps you into having even more mana to keep up with your expensive Eldrazi stuff, while also giving you a way to exile their lands without giving them anything back in an uncounterable fashion. I just think that's kind of bananas. Is it good enough? Will it see play? I'm not sure. It's really, really hard to judge the modern format these days. The card pool is just so huge, but let me know what you think in the comments. Next up, we've got the Necro Bloom. This might be my favorite card of the day. This is 4 mana in the colors of Abzan for a 2/7 legendary plant. That's right, we're getting more plant support. Has a landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token, and if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. And then land cards in your graveyard have Dredge 2, which means you can return that land from your graveyard to your hand and mill 2 cards instead of drawing a card anytime you would draw a card. Pretty crazy. If that means if you're out of lands and you really would rather landfall than play a spell, you could just, you know, get rid of whatever your draw is gonna be and get your land back so that you can get this landfall trigger, which seems pretty crazy. Going wide with 0/1 plants early seems really fun for something like, I don't know, Insidious Roots. But then once they start becoming zombies, maybe that plays into Zombie Tribal? Do you play this card in Zombie Tribal? I don't know. Maybe you don't care about the fact that they're zombies. Maybe you just care about the fact that you are jamming a bunch of lands onto the battlefield every turn and making a metric ton of 2/2s. Maybe that's the part that matters. Maybe this is just a weird Field of the Dead tacked onto a body. I don't know. Where does this best fit, right? There's so many places it could fit. There's so much crazy stuff you can do with it. But where does it best fit? Let me know in the comments, because the card seems super fun and it seems really powerful. There's gotta be a deck out there that's just aching to play something like this. And then our last card of the day, we finally have 6. 6 by himself before he joins up with Ren to become Ren in 6, which I think is really, really interesting. I'm pretty excited about this card, but it's also deceptively powerful. This is a 2/4 legendary tree folk with reach for 1 green and 2, so it's, you know, okay on defense or whatever. But then whenever 6 attacks, you mill 3 cards, and you may put a land card from among them into your hand. That's going to be pretty good in the early game when it's a safer bet that you can swing in and not die with that 4 toughness. Gets a little harder to use as the game goes on. But the last ability is what really takes this card over the top. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have Retrace. Now, the way that Retrace works, for those of you who don't know how Retrace works, is at any point in time, you can discard a land from your hand in order to play something with Retrace from your graveyard. So basically, every single permanent in your graveyard can just be replayed as if it's in your hand if you just discard the land in your hand. So basically, every land you draw, every land you get in your hand could potentially be any permanent in your graveyard. It's almost like the permanents in your graveyard are an extension of your hand. All you need is a land in your hand, and you get to replace it with playing that permanent. It's so crazy. It's crazy enough on its own, but then when you go back and you look at its first ability again, when it attacks, you get to mill 3 cards and then put a land from among them back into your hand. You can constantly keep putting a land back in your hand so that you can discard it to Retrace so that you can play whatever permanent from your graveyard you want. Which means basically, as long as this guy can keep swinging, you can keep playing any permanent from your graveyard every single turn, at least once a turn, no matter what. And it's crazy. When you play something with Retrace, it doesn't have to get exiled ever, too. It's not like it has finality counters on it. It's not like when they kill it, it gets exiled and you can't do it again. You can just keep replaying the same permanents if they keep going back to the graveyard. And that's crazy. Obviously, this is going to be a lot better if you have other ways to enable it, other ways to put lands into your hand, or to mill lands into your graveyard and stuff, so that you don't have to risk attacking in with 6 every turn. But the fact that it does have a built-in way to trigger itself, it does have that attack ability as extra, seems really, really good. I think this guy's way better than he might seem like on paper because of the way that his abilities synergize with each other. And I just think it's really fun too. Not only is it really fun mechanically, but it's really fun thematically that we get a card here 4/6 before 6 joins up with Ren. I just think that's really, really cool. But that's going to do it for today. That's the last card. I still have some spoilers to get to. Those will be coming in videos in the coming days, so look forward to that. There's just a ton of stuff on the horizon. So if you haven't already, make sure you like the video because, like I said, that does help the video get out to so many more people, and I am exhausted from putting this video together and then finally filming it. So I would appreciate if you could help this video get out to more people, get more out of it. I would appreciate that very much. And then also subscribe if you're new, like I said, because you don't want to miss what's coming. Tons of crazy spoiler content. I try to jump on it and cover it as quick as I possibly can so it gets out to you guys as soon as possible. And then tons of deck tech stuff coming as well for Thunder Junction Standard and beyond. Really exciting time for Magic the Gathering. Thank you guys so much for checking out the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.